Well, good evening. Have an interesting little session tonight. I think you'll enjoy. We've just had the supper in here, the Last Supper, and our speaker of the evening regaled us with things undoubtedly that will be left unsaid here. No, I don't mean that. He will share with you his inimitable brand of humor. I met him several years ago. His humor is genial and gentle and sometimes a little pungent and sometimes to us Republicans, we Republicans, and I'm at Harvard. It's not any fun at all. There's nothing funny about it. But it did remind me of the two guys in the penitentiary in another state, and one turned to the other and said, "The food was better here when you were governor." But this man has been doing comedy since the second grade, when the boys and girls were divided up to do skits. The girls did a skit about Mickey Mouse. It was a very tender thing, and he and the other boys then, and he leading, wrote a skit lampooning the girls and their work, and the girls ended up crying. And a star was born, and people are still crying. He graduated from Harvard University in 1973. How about that? And was rejected as a writer and participant of the Lampoon. But he is risen from the dead and showed them. And in 1975, Lorne Michaels saw his talent and hired Al for a startup comedy, Saturday Night Live. Ann and I have 3 children. All of them have been totally corrupted by that program. We didn't know that, we knew rattlesnakes, but we never knew Monty Python. He was in the basement during those times too. Well, enough of that. And then, of course, Mad Magazine. But they're nice children now. Among his roles on the show, he shined as the pathetic 12-step, unlicensed therapist, Stuart Smalley. Who was good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, people liked him. He's written 2 books, including a #1 bestseller, which obviously is not on remainder yet. Or no. Rush Limbaugh is a big, fat idiot. And a current hit, a stirring book called Why Not Me, which is very thought-provoking. Now the executive producer and star of ABC's Late Line with a new episode, March 16th, in which I am a player. And much more than a cameo appearance, I might add. We filmed for half a day on that damn thing, didn't we? It was marvelous. And,
some people are quicker.
But I don't know what the final edited product shows, and I have great trepidation about that. And one other thing, do not gallop toward the door at 8:45, because we're going to put this thing at 9 o'clock up here. If anyone wants to watch the thing tonight at 9 o'clock, it will be here. And you need not run out to see Barbara Walters and Monica both crying. And I'm sure it will come to that, so do not leave the chambers at 10 to 9 or 5 to 9 so that our guests can take all of the questions that you can possibly present. Al Franken, who's brought great good humor and a lot of fun to the American people and people around the world. Al Franken.
Thank you. I'm a Democrat, and I used to really dislike Alan. And now I kind of miss him, which shows you just what kind of Republicans are there now. And I think it's to us Republicans, as a Harvard graduate, it's an object. In a, preposition. Anyway, objective case. That's. Well, welcome to the warm-up for the Monica thing. Wasn't this a thoughtful way for the JFK Center to get everyone together for the things to watch out for tonight? Monica's views on Kosovo. Also, one thing, I saw some of the promos. One thing that really confused me was the lighting on Barbara Walters. She just seems so out of focus, kind of soft. And ABC has a lot of really, they can get the best technicians. They can get someone in focus, but I don't know. For some reason, you can't really see her too well. I think you'll see tonight why it was good that we had no witnesses at the trial. If we had the impeachment trial, if we had witnesses, what you would have seen. You remember one of the articles in impeachment was perjury, and that the president perjured himself on the grand jury testimony, and part of that was in the grand jury testimony he said he had not perjured himself on the civil deposition when asked whether he had had sex with Monica Lewinsky under the definition provided by the Paula Jones attorneys, which, if you remember, is touching someone else's genitals, inner thigh, buttocks, or breast with the intent to arouse or gratify. So if we had had witnesses, what we would have had to see was Monica Lewinsky brought to the floor of the Senate and the House managers saying, Ms. Lewinsky, did the president touch your breasts? And she would have said yes. And then in a very dramatic move, the White House counsel would have brought the president to the Senate floor and said, Mr. President, did you touch Monica Lewinsky's breasts? And he would have said yes. And they would have said, was it with the intent to arouse or gratify? And he would have said, no. No, it was for balance. Okay. It's the last time I look at Alan for tonight. There's this whole scandal has had a very bad effect on the country, I think. But there's some good things that have come out of it. Husbands and wives are having frank conversations about what does and does not constitute adultery. For example, my wife has explained to me that she feels that oral sex is adultery, which I guess explains why we haven't had any since we've been married. Bill Bennett is disappointed in all of us, and he's also worried about the children, the effect that this is going to have, the whole thing will have on the children. And I have 2 kids, and some of you may be parents. Not many, because mainly students, but there's some here. And this will, when you have kids, this will probably come up. But this is what I did, and I think it's worked out pretty well. I brought my kids in the living room. I said, sit down. I said, I love you. You're safe. The president isn't going to try to have sex with you. And so far it seems to have worked out okay. They're doing just fine. I was going to talk a little bit about my book tonight, maybe read a little bit from it, and then answer questions. The book, Why Not Me? In it, I run for president and become the first Jewish president of the United States. And it's pretty much a disaster. After my last book, Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot. And a lot of people have asked me why that title. And you have to remember that Rush was really fat. A huge, fat man. Just enormously fat man with a huge gut and just a big fat ass. He was just huge. And so after that book came out, a number of people asked me, they said, Al, you should run for office. You're fairly articulate, you know a lot about politics, you've been married once, you're very, very good looking. You know, you should run for office. And I tried to explain to everyone that I'd be a terrible office holder. The responsibility of actually making decisions that affect people's lives would crush me. I'm very indecisive as it is, and I just could not do it. So I kind of wrote this book sort of to prove it. And it's a scathing satire of the American political system in that it creates a scenario in which I could actually win. And then I'm president for 144 days, and then I resign. The sort of the three sections to the book. The first is the official campaign autobiography that a lot of candidates for president produce. This usually explains to the reader why all the things that have led up to this moment in the guy's life where it's absolutely essential that he be elected president for the good of the country. And in that I deal with a little bit of my past that every baby boomer candidate now has to deal with, about the Vietnam War experience, none. Drug, some, and sex. And I'll talk about that. I'll read a little bit about my response to the politics of personal destruction when I read a little passage from my official campaign autobiography, Daring to Lead. The middle section of the book is my campaign for presidency. It's the longest section. You meet Team Franken, which includes my brother Otto, a recovering sex addict and alcoholic. Along the way, we pick up Dan Haggerty of Grizzly Adams fame, who becomes sort of our campaign's Rosie Greer. Norm Ornstein from the American Enterprise Institute is my chief staff, and I have Dick Morris as my media advisor. And I have one issue. It's a single issue campaign, lowering ATM fees. And this gets some traction, actually. And then in a real stroke of luck, the Y2K bug affects only one thing, ATM machines. And everyone loses any deposits they ever made in an ATM machine. And it's an incredible meltdown that affects a lot of people's lives. For example, there's a diabetic woman in Connecticut who on New Year's Day goes to her ATM machine to get cash for some insulin, and the cash is not there, and she goes into insulin shock and ends up losing her foot. And in a masterstroke, Dick Morris decides to sort of use this woman as our poster child, the poster for the ATM meltdown, and I become sort of a hero, and I win the Democratic nomination from Gore, and then I defeat Newt Gingrich in the general election. He wins only Cobb County, Georgia, and pockets of Idaho. And but this is sort of what does it. Bob Woodward, the last part of the book is my presidency, told mainly, the first 100 days are told by Bob Woodward in his chronicle of my first 100 days called The Void. And he says of Dick Morris that feet would be his downfall, a foot would be his salvation. So, as I say, my presidency is pretty much a disaster. My inaugural address is a miscalculation. I decide that to apologize for slavery, quoting freely from the movie Mandingo. It's not well received, and I immediately go into a deep depression and don't show up for anything. My spokesman, Howard Feynman, the cover story is I have chronic fatigue syndrome, but it's just a depression, really. And they bring in Admiral Itzkowitz, the highest ranking Jewish doctor in the military. I should explain that I have an entirely Jewish cabinet. I keep Madeleine Albright, by the way, and Dan Glickman, and this is under the theory that America doesn't want a cabinet that looks like America. They want a cabinet the president can be comfortable with. And my running mate is, my vice president is Joe Lieberman. The idea is to balance the ticket. I'm Reform, and he's Orthodox. So, and my Secretary of the Interior is Ralph Lauren. Anyway, Admiral Itzkowitz starts to medicate me, and he doesn't get it quite right. So I'm sort of bouncing up and down. I have like a bipolar thing going on, and during a particular low, for example, I punched Nelson Mandela in the stomach during a state visit and rupture his spleen. During a manic high, I have myself cloned, and the embryo is placed into Anne Heche's uterus. And in fact, the whole epilogue is told by my clone, Alonzo Heche DeGeneres, who is a curator of the Franken Presidential Library, which has 144 rooms, one for each day of my presidency. So that's what the book is, and so I'm gonna read. Read. Okay, this is from Daring to Lead, and it's sort of my me taking on this politics of personal destruction we've seen. I've talked about Franny, my wife, before this. So I say, although a child of the 60s, Franny harbored some traditional views on the sanctity of marriage, views that I now share in principle. I admit that during the SNL years, Saturday Night Live, I caused pain in my marriage, specifically the sort of pain that might have been caused if I had been repeatedly unfaithful to my wife and spent a number of holidays and anniversaries away from home in the company of a series of mistresses. When I decided to run for president, I knew there would come a time when I would have to address this issue. It's become an unfortunate fact of life that anyone running for president in this day and age must not only present a compelling vision for the future of the country, which is time-consuming enough, but also expose his private life to the closest possible scrutiny. As others have pointed out, I am not perfect. No one is perfect. Not my opponent, whoever that may be. He or she is just a man like me. I don't think the American public wants a president who has never had any problems. They want a president who can solve problems. And my wife and I have solved our problems time and time again. With that in mind, I want to set a few ground rules for the forthcoming campaign. First of all, having already acknowledged causing pain in my marriage, I will not dignify with an answer any further questions concerning my past, present, or future sexual behavior. This ground rule should not be regarded as an admission that I'm currently involved in any improper relationships. It is simply my attempt to elevate the level of discourse beyond the tawdry obsessions of tabloid journalism. The second ground rule is much like the first ground rule. It is simply that I will not confirm or deny any reports of my involvement in any improper sexual relationships. Again, nothing about this ground rule should be construed as an admission of anything. Third, I will not be drawn into a debate about what is or what is not a proper sexual relationship, or, like I said, whether or not I'm having one. I'm just not going to talk about that. Fourth, my facial expression while I am listening to other people discuss improper sexual relationships should not be construed one way or the other. Also, I would caution the media against employing body language experts or voice stress tests in order to determine whether or not I'm having improper sexual relations. If you do, I will sue you. The next ground rule is a little complicated, so please read it carefully. If at any point during my candidacy or my term in office I am accused by a woman of having had improper sexual relations with her, my silence should be interpreted as a sincere belief that the woman in question is crazy or a skank or both. Although it would not be appropriate for me to say so out loud. Well, that's some of the ground rules. There's more ground rules. This is the introduction to The Void by Bob Woodward. When Al Franken was swept into office with the largest plurality in American electoral history, it was with the promise of filling the void between what Americans wanted from their leaders and what their leaders had been giving them. During the first 100 days, that void not only remained unfilled, but was replaced by an even greater, more alarming void. This is the story of that void. Since most of the principles in the story I am about to tell remain in office, at least for the time being, the reader will appreciate that many of my sources did not wish to speak on the record for fear of retribution by President Franken or his brother Otto. In reporting any story as embarrassing as this one, it is important to state clearly the methodology governing the use of sources who either insist on anonymity or on being referred to by someone else's name. Many of the sources asked to be referred to as Deep Throat, and I am sorry that I couldn't accommodate their wishes. The actual Deep Throat, Al Haig, was not a source. Overall, more than 250 people were interviewed, some as many as 250 times, and a few by me personally. Only one person, Dick Morris, agreed to speak for attribution. Dialogue and quotations have been recreated based on what I think the participants probably said. When someone is said to have thought or felt something, that description comes from my research assistant, Gary, who is particularly good at that kind of thing. When someone is said to have smelt something, Gary means that they either thought they smelt it or felt they smelt it. For all intents and purposes, these concepts may be regarded as interchangeable. Weather conditions cited were obtained from my editor's neighbor's son, Paul Zervos, a 33-year-old idiot savant who can remember the weather conditions for every hour of every day of his life, even though he is unable to dress himself without assistance. Some of the sequences in the book are what I call fantasy sequences. These were episodes for which no sources were readily available, or for which the primary source had died. And it goes on, too. I'm going to read just one thing I like reading, which is just, and then we'll open the floor to questions. This is because Monica. This is also in the void, and it's a description. It's my inaugural speech, and it's the beginning of the speech, just the beginning. And then a little description afterwards of what's going through someone's mind. President Clinton, Mrs. Rodham Clinton, Mr. Chief Justice, Mrs. Chief Justice, members of Congress, astronauts, my fellow Americans. Before I begin today's historic address, marking the peaceful transition of power and celebrating the awe-inspiring majesty of our remarkable democratic process, the Park Service Police have asked me to make the following announcement. They have found a 6-year-old girl answering to the name of Molly, who has become separated from her parents somewhere in the mall area. Molly's parents, if you can hear me, please identify yourself to the nearest member of the Park Service Police who will escort you to the holding area. Morris could barely conceal his surprise at this unexpected wrinkle. No president in recent memory had started his inaugural address this way. Morris couldn't help wondering if President Franken had made up the story of the little girl to begin the speech on a touchingly human note. That's exactly what I would have done, thought Morris. Although I would have made the girl slightly younger and possibly deaf. So... Okay, well, we've reached ask questions. Are you?
Line them up. Now, we'll start here, microphones start. There are 2 up there, right? Great. And so, gather by the river.
Okay.
Step right up. Don't be fearful. Woodward is not here.
Is it on? Oh.
There's one.
Where are you?
I'm over here.
Oh, okay, great.
Mr. Franken, Hillary Rodham Clinton is thinking about perhaps becoming the next senator from New York. And I was just curious as to what your thoughts were about her future political career.
Well, I live in New York, and I'd like to see her. I'd like to see the Democrats keep that seat. That's Pat Moynihan's seat, and I think she probably has the best chance of doing it. As far as her political future, what I'd like to see is 8 years of Clinton, 8 years of Gore, and then 8 years of Rodham Clinton. And really for no other reason than to make the Republicans just so angry.
Mr. Franken, thanks a lot for coming tonight. I really don't have a question for you. It's more of a request. Back during the 1988 presidential campaign on SNL, I remember that you did this impersonation of Pat Robertson. I was only 8 years old at the time, but this has stuck with me. If you could, please do a little bit of that, or if not, I'll settle for Al D'Amato.
Okay. I'll try to do both. Let me see if I can do Pat. I haven't done him well. One thing he said, I covered the 96 convention in San Diego, and I stopped him. He was on the floor, and I asked him a question, and he had said on the 700 Club, he said that, let's see if I can do this, lesbians, most pro-choice or pro-abortion women are lesbians. And lesbians want you to have abortions because they don't want you to have what they can't have. So I'm on the floor in 96, and he's they got a crowd around him, and he's got guys, doing this. But I kind of got up to him. I said, "You said this," and I said, "No, you said that, right?" And he goes, "Well, yes, because it's true." So, I go to a lot of Christian Coalition events, and I like a lot of the people there. He's just kind of, I think he's the Millennium, Jerry Falwell's Antichrist thing about a couple months ago or 6 weeks ago. He said that the Antichrist is alive and is a male Jew. And I was kind of trying to figure out who it was, I thought Marvin Hamlish. That's all I could come up with. But there's all this sort of the millennium is bringing out this kind of, this is all scripture and an interpretation of scripture of the prophecy of Revelations, which is that there'll be a rapture and then tribulation and then Armageddon. And Ralph Reed is someone I know, and I kind of actually enjoy talking to him. And the rapture, as you know, is when there'll be a trumpet will blow, and then everyone who has accepted Jesus Christ as the Savior will ascend to heaven. So if you're on a plane and the pilot has accepted Christ, you're just in big trouble. Okay. So so I was talking to Ralph, and I said, I'm worried that after the rapture, that the Christian Coalition is going to be kind of short-staffed, and won't be able to get out your voter guides. So, D'Amato was my senator for a long time, and so I worked up a pretty good impression of it. So you'll hear it now. This is him, Al D'Amato. He was the first attack dog. He was the first. He was in charge of the bank. He's in charge of the banking committee, or was the chairman of the banking committee. So he was the first Whitewater hearing was his. And the way I put it was having having Al D'Amato head up an ethics investigation is a little like having Bob Dornan head up a mental health task force. But this is Al D'Amato at the Whitewater hearings. We are simply attempting to ascertain the veracity of the First Lady vis-a-vis the inconsistencies and discrepancies which I am told mean the same thing. Insofar and vis-a-vis the documentation contained within the documents and the information contained therein, insofar and vis-a-vis. Boy, does anyone remember where the sentence started? Because I'm just an idiot this way. So anyway, that's. Up there, wherever Al was pointing. Alan. Where? I can't see. No, I guess not. Well, then we'll go. Okay, you.
Okay, we'll go to this mic.
You misled me.
I did. Well, you've been misleading me. Hi, I'm a graduate student and, among other things, a research assistant. I know you have a lot of fun with research assistants.
Yes.
They appear in your book a lot. And have any of them tried to kill you?
No, I'm actually very. Let's see. Here's my research assistant, Jeff Rodkey, who went to Harvard, and he was my research assistant on the Rush Limbaugh book. Has sold several screenplays since then, so he's doing very well. And my assistant for him, or after him, Mike Kalt, is law student here, and Jessica Banks, my last assistant, is now getting her doctorate at MIT. And my assistant before that is at Columbia. And so I guess that's how interesting this answer was. So I pick smart people, but please don't ask for a job after this. None of you. But I actually treat him very well. I know what you're referring to. In the Rush Limbaugh book, Jeff dies. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, good evening. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School and a big fan of Vice President Gore's, hoping and looking forward to his presidential campaign. And I'm wondering what advice you would offer him as a presidential candidate to improve his speech-making capabilities.
Should I tell the same? I'll tell him the joke. I like the vice president, but I was telling people at dinner, and I'll just repeat it because I want to. I did the White House Correspondents' Dinner in '94, I guess, and I had met Tipper once before, but I was at a little reception before the dinner. And I went up to her and I said, I have a joke about your husband that I think might be, my instinct says is a little over the line and I shouldn't do it. But I just went, and she goes, well, what's the joke? Tell me the joke. I said, okay. Al Gore announced today that, because of his commitment to the environment, that he has decided to change his policy on the stick up his butt. That instead of replacing the stick every day with a new stick, he will keep the same stick up there for the entire administration. And if this is a two-term administration, this evidently would save an entire rainforest. And Tipper said, I'd go with your instinct. I've met the vice president in formal and more private settings, and he's actually got a very good sense of humor and is realer and looser than he comes off. But that's the case with a lot of politicians, and so I don't know. My advice to him is to try to just be himself, and sometimes he can, and he's been very good, for example, in debates, like with Kemp, but that wasn't hard. By the way, when Kemp, I was in San Diego when Kemp was named as Dole's running mate, and Republicans were really excited about Kemp, and a lot of them were saying that he would bring a lot of minority voters to the Republican ticket. And Newt Gingrich said this. He said, Jack Kemp has showered with more blacks than most Republicans have shaken hands with. And the great thing about this was that this was seen as a cause for optimism. Okay. Alan will call on people.
Yes, Mr. Franken, I was curious if you have any thoughts on the election of Jesse Ventura as governor of Minnesota. And maybe an impersonation as well.
I don't know. I haven't worked on my Jesse. One of the reasons I think he won is that in Minnesota, you don't have to register to vote. You can. Am I right, Skip? Right. You can just show up. Or same day, you can just basically show up. So what I understand is, was that a lot of his vote was just people seeing the news during the day or the evening and kind of going like, oh man, he could win. I think I'm going to vote. Honey, how do you vote? Where do you go? Because Jesse could win. So evidently, that was kind of the margin of victory was, oh boy. You know. But I don't really do it, because I do a Minnesota accent and I do a wrestler, and that should do it, shouldn't it? But he said the other day, he was in Washington for the governor's conference, and he said something about, who knows, in 2008, I could be at that house, or 2004, I think he said. I could be at that house, or I could be on the beach at Kona. And but I'm not a Minnesota. I'm a Minnesota native, but not a Minnesota resident. And I would have voted for Skip.
Swedish accent joke? Swedish? You know, Swedish.
You want me to do an ethnic joke? Well, Sven and Jan were... No, I don't do that. And there was Torvald peeing on the hot box. That's a punchline from a joke that I don't know what the setup is.
Hi, Mr. Franken. In your book, you mentioned the consequences of ATM failures due to the year 2000.
Yes.
Do you have any Y2K predictions for us? And maybe if you can give us a impersonation of year 2000.
A man with a sense of humor. I don't know. I think they're going to probably have more problems in foreign countries than in the United States. Why wasn't this anticipated? Did these people not think the year 2000? Can someone explain that to me? By the way, one thing I want to say about the year 2000 is that the millennium doesn't start January 1st, 2000. It starts January 1st, 2001. And this is very important because I plan on New Year's Eve this year to go around with Dick Cavett and George Will and just yell at people. Don't. Calm down. It's not the millennium. It's next year. You know, somebody's got to do it.
You seem to have a very good job, and you seem to have a lot of people you can talk about very easily. And my question was, if Dan Quayle gets elected president, what will there be left for you to do?
See, that's not a real big worry.
I guess not, huh?
You know, from what I understand, Dan Quayle is not as stupid as he comes off. You know, a number of people, like his wife, have said that he was unfairly tarred with the brush of being kind of stupid. And I just think, like, let's say Pat Moynihan somehow, before you'd ever heard him speak, someone said, you know, he's really stupid. And then Pat Moynihan was on Meet the Press. You wouldn't think he was stupid anymore. Dan Quayle has been around for 11 years. I mean, I think that you know, he's not as dumb as he seems. That's to me that's a pretty low bar. You know?
I actually have a question about another bar, and if you have an impersonation, I'd like to see this too. What's your opinion on Bob Barr?
Bob Barr was my favorite house manager. a Republican from Georgia. He, you know, there's so many great things about Bob Barr. He's been married 3 times and sponsored the Defense of Marriage Act. He wanted to impeach the president before Monica. And he, I carry this around in case this happens, but he visited this group called the Council. He spoke to this group called the Council of Conservative Citizens, which is a racist group and part of their thing is they're against interracial marriage. Okay, so he was sort of criticized for this, and he said, I didn't speak to them. And then when he was shown a picture of him speaking to them, he said, I spoke to them. So I was critical of that at a book signing that was broadcast on C-SPAN 2. So I got a letter about 3 days ago from someone from the New York chapter of the Council of Conservative Citizens, and it's so well written that I thought I'd read it to you, or, you know, because it's just fun. It's just fun. Dear Mr. Franken, your recent performance on C-SPAN 2 trying desperately to sell your dumb, irrelevant book was a real bore. Insurance seminars are funnier than you. You're just a boring guy. Hypocrite, too. You mentioned the CFCC as a racist group who have odd ideas about the future. Those odd ideas are that multiracialism and racial diversity has many problems and isn't working too well. Publicly, you have to say all that bullshit, but you obviously had a bolt of realism in your private life. You are an extremely liberal Jew who loves to live around other Jews. You live in a lily white community, New York City. You sent your children to a totally white school. My daughter went to the prom with Jamal. Hey man, racial diversity is great, but not for hatchet face Al. Drop dead, hypocrite. P.S. Hatchet face, you should join our group. You agree with us. Have a very white day. I know you will. By the way, you have a face only a mother could love, and I'm sure she has problems looking at it. And see, the guy didn't sign it, and it's too bad because it's so funny, the letter. You know, this thing about my mom having a problem looking at my face, that's funny. That's funny stuff, and, you know, we could use him on Late Line. I'm sure it'd be fun around the table. So this is, also Trent Lott endorsed their agenda.
Al, earlier, again, going back to the dinner, you talked about the 3 questions that you got to ask Pat Buchanan, but you never gave us his answers, and I'm wondering...
I didn't get his answers.
You never got his answers?
No. Newsweek sent me out to cover the '96 campaign, and it was a disaster, and I got fired. And one of my jobs was to interview Pat Buchanan, and I had to clear the questions with his spokesperson, his press person. And the questions were, Mr. Buchanan, you have said that 1 million immigrant Englishmen would assimilate to America better than 1 million Zulus. Who do you think would do better, 1 million Zulus or 1 million pygmies? You have said that Holocaust survivors have, quote, group fantasies of martyrdom and heroics. Is the same true of your supporters? And then the last question was, have you ever had a homoerotic dream? So you can see why I was fired. Yeah.
I was wondering, you said before that you don't think you'd ever want to run for office, but if you've ever had any thoughts about being a consultant or ever getting involved in politics?
Well, I have been involved in politics in that I like a shill for the Democrats. So, so I'll speak for, do fundraising, and it has its rewards. For example, in '97, I was invited to all the inaugural balls. I went to the one for all the DNC high rollers, and it was an incredible event. For $50,000, you could do a slow waltz with Hillary. For $25,000, you got to do a tango with Tipper. And for just $25, you got a lap dance from Janet Reno. But I just go for the joke, is what I do.
I was wondering if you could comment on your mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani. He seems to hold a grudge. I campaigned, I did an event for Ruth Messenger about a week before the election where he was probably ahead by 34 points or something. And so now he won't do late line because I did that. And all I did for Ruth was I just stood up and did jokes about how bad she was going to lose. So I didn't really. So I don't know. I think that he's, the city's doing well. I think he's a little arch for me. I'm in his personality is a little sort of. I think he's really wired. He's cracked down on crime, and there have been some terrible abuses, and his responses to it. I saw him on Ted Koppel on Nightline the other night, and they had interviewed a lot of New Yorkers and black men. When they asked them, have you been stopped by the police, all said yes. And most white men were asked, have you been stopped by the police in New York? And almost all of them said no. And so Giuliani said, well, I've been stopped by the police. Dozens of times. And Koppel goes, what about? What they? And he was, when I was, I was polite. I told him I was polite. Well, what were you, and I think it felt a little defensive to me, and he just seems he's kind of wound tight. So he's, one more, and then we got to do Monica.
Your book is about the first Jewish president, and at dinner you discussed the prospects of Colin Powell or Hillary Clinton becoming president. Realistically, what do you see happening first, Jewish, black, or female president? Or a black, female, Jewish president?
Well, the lesson of Colin Powell was, to me as a Jew, was that the first Jew to be elected president will have to be a four-star general. And so, as I told people in the dinner, that toward this end, I thought that we could find a high-ranking Jew in the military and started grooming him for a run at the White House. So I did some research, and unfortunately, it turns out that currently, the highest-ranking Jew in the military is the comptroller of the Coast Guard. So things don't look too good. Well, we're done, right? Yeah.
I wanted to add a note to Bob Woodward's remarks there. We said after Bill Casey, remember, perished, and we said that Woodward was the last person to interview him after his death. I remember that. Well, giving you an example of the fact that humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. And that's exactly what it is. And so this man goes on with his outrageous, with his marvelous sense of humor and timing and fun, and we thank you for being with us at the Institute of Politics. But indeed, humor is the universal solvent, and you bring lightness to our lives sometimes. And you've been very good about Republicans these last days. I mean, what he did tonight was hardly anything. So Al, thank you very much, and on with the program.